I played over 30 hours of Dragon's Dogma 2 and I still feel like I barely scratched the surface. From getting immersed in its sprawling and enthralling world to going heads-on against the most epic fights, it's really easy to lose count of the hours that you'll be spending in it. It's not a perfect game by any means, so today we're gonna take a look and cover both the positives and the negatives, as well as answering your biggest question, should you spend any money on it. Of course, huge thanks are in order to Capcom for providing us with an early review code, so let's jump right in it. But I really liked that the game doesn't spend too much time with pointless introductions. After a quick story cutscene to give you context, and the character creation right after, you finally get control over your character who's been sentenced to work under grueling conditions at a nearby excavation site. A few mishaps later, and with a lapsing memory of your own past, eventually you do make your escape, which is essentially when the game completely opens up to you. I almost immediately fell in love with the game world as it's seemingly filled with things to discover, and most important, it truly feels alive. It feels like at almost every turn you get to encounter someone or something worth checking out. If it's not a new town or village bustling with life, then it's caves and secret passageways filled with enemies and loot, enemy camps, lots of chests to steal, and even enemies setting up ambushes on the road as passers go by. No joke, there's a whole mechanic where enemies will lurk in the shrubbery until it's the moment to strike and you will never see them coming. Or you can similarly ambush them should you spot them in advance. Also, random stranger patrols that you can recruit and people getting attacked in need of saving. There's lots of this and more that you can encounter in the open world. However, there's quite nothing like going through the forest and hearing the rumblings of a cyclops or a minotaur who just spotted you from beyond the tree line, or having a griffin descend from the skies just when you thought the situation can't get any worse. Yes, it's true that the game starts a bit slow until your character picks up some traction, gets a bit of gear, level up, and especially once you get some of those strong abilities, but by level 15 to 20, you're gonna be well and good to deal with many of the major threats that you previously thought impossible. Especially with the Thief. Yeah, it starts slow, but it's one of my favorite in the game, and you're gonna see some builds coming up really soon to truly make this thing almost completely immortal. Now, it's moments like these combined with the generally gorgeous looking open world that makes the game really fun to explore instead of having to resort to fast travel mechanics. I played it on the PlayStation 5 by the way, and no, there were no options to choose between different graphics modes, and the game also appeared to be set to 30 FPS. However, I didn't feel any stutters, or if there were any, they were minimal at best, and mostly kept for the most stressful of situations, like for example when visiting the capital city or when having loads of enemies casting spells at one time. Now, I do kinda get why the FPS has been limited on consoles, mainly because the open world detail does seem to be quite big and there does seem to be a lack of proper optimization. However, I still think that not having a 60 FPS on a current gen title such as this can be a very big minus for many players out there. Otherwise, performance issues were quite minimal for me personally, though occasionally I did notice characters appearing and disappearing right in front of me, limited instances of texture popping, but overall the gameplay felt very smooth. However, where the game truly shines is its freedom. Freedom of class choice, freedom of exploration, freedom of fighting, even freedom of how you complete quests. Combat by far is the game's biggest and strongest point. It feels even more refined than before, and it feels extremely impactful. Every single hit, both from your character as well as from enemies, feel like they can literally move mountains. My first playthrough was with the Thief vocation, and despite it being a bit less beginners friendly than other options early on, it doesn't take too long to become an absolutely insane powerhouse. Damage on it is completely busted a bit later on, and there are options in there that can make you almost immune to almost any form of damage. It's by far my favorite vocation so far, and there are so many cool ways to set up awesome boss takedowns with it. Enemies also feel impactful, like I said. The full-on swing from a Cyclops will absolutely devastate you and even send you flying, but even smaller enemies such as these annoying goblins can put on some serious damage as they constantly jump and throw things at you. It's not as demanding as something like Elden Ring, for example, and you can certainly face roll every now and then, but overall I found the combat to be a perfect mix of difficulty and skill to make every encounter entertaining, even for the 1000th time, as well as memorable. Like pretty much all the moments I fought Cyclops or other large enemies were some of the best moments in the entire game. In fact, I would say that the way you grapple and walk on enemies' backs is much better than ever before, and this can let you actually set up some very interesting new mechanics that were specifically added in Dragon's Dogma 2. Like for example, this explosive device that you can leave off inside enemies' heads with the thief can actually stun them very easily, but also deals tons of damage, and it's extremely fun to pull off every time you do it. Another thing that the game does really well is that it forces you to adapt, especially since many pretty difficult mechanics are thrown at you from very early on. You're kind of forced to change your playstyle from the very beginning so that you don't risk messing things up as you later progress. One of the best examples of that is the way the game handles max health. So as you get hit, and especially so when your character dies, you will lose a portion of your character's max HP. So the more that happens, the lower the value goes, to the point that you might only be able to regen up to, like for example, a quarter of your normal HP bar. So you're kind of forced in this situation to adopt a playstyle that also has cooldown periods, like for example, going back at the inn back in town, or setting up a campfire and just resting for the day, fully replenishing your character and party's HP, and then going back at it when the situation calls for it. And since these locations are quite far and in between, it gives you the constant reminder of the dangers and the drawbacks of adventuring unprepared, something that very few games nowadays manage to do. Actually, even mechanics that have existed in open world games for decades at this point work in unexpected ways in Dragon's Dogma 2, such as the limited fast travel ox carts oftentimes getting ambushed, so even when you think you have a moment to catch your breath, you should probably go ahead and think again. Now, like I said, it's not all positives, as no game out there is completely perfect, so there are a few things that I wasn't completely sold out on. For example, the story and general voice acting, or better yet, the sound mixing of the character voices did not really do it for me. On one side, the main story not being a big hitter is somewhat understandable. It's never been the point of Dragon's Dogma story to make waves, but more to set up the groove and kind of give you context to your journey, and I generally did not have problem with it either. I think there are quite a few interesting characters in the main narrative, but still nothing too memorable about them either. Now, the voice mixing I found a bit weird because it didn't seem to have, or at least it had, very little spatial directioning. It's like characters are constantly in your ears despite obviously being further away from you, which sometimes makes things confusing, as in other games I kinda got accustomed to the idea of relying on characters' voices to guide myself towards objectives when multitasking and doing a bunch of other stuff. Especially in Red Dead Redemption 2, it was a very useful mechanic to have. Now, on the negatives, I can't say there's anything egregious with the game. In fact, it's very much a very enjoyable yet challenging ride. Maybe just a few annoyances with the way some systems are being purposefully held back to justify a so-called level of difficulty. The biggest example over here, and I don't see a reason for it, is having a very limited save file system, basically of one single file. Well, two if you think about reloading the last inn. Given how easy it is to mess things up and permanently lock yourself out of certain quests, especially since quite a few of them are time sensitive, I don't see a reason for us not to have at least like 2, 3, or 4 save files. This ended up on one occasion at the very least with several of hours of my playtime being completely wiped because reloading the normal save file brought me near a foe that would constantly one-shot me, but reloading the inn was a few hours old at that point and it pretty much made me lose progress. One can only imagine what happens if the autosave gets corrupted or if you get stuck somewhere and can't get out. And again, restricting something in this way doesn't equate to skill or difficulty. Another one is the number of time-limited quests. Actually, there are two categories of this. So it's not just quests that will fail after a few in-game days, but also ones that can be gone completely after reaching certain points in the main story. However, in practice, what I've noticed is that a few of the quests completely disappeared even after a simple story cutscene, despite them seemingly not having any connection to the main narrative, nor the narrative having changed anything significantly after that cutscene took place. We were in the same location at the same time as before. It just completely logged me out of those specific quests, or well, at the very least, they were completely gone from my journal. And that was with me making absolutely sure I completed everything before progressing any further in the main story. Normally, I don't have a problem with this kind of limited time content. I actually love it because it gives you reasons to go again and play again. And yes, the game has a new game plus mode, so you can totally restart the main story with all of your kept progress. But given the number of points of failure and this plus the limited save files don't make any sense to me. Maybe one of them could have been scrapped in order to change or keep the other. Like for example, have multiple save files but keep the way you can fail quests just the same as it is now. Again, artificial restrictions do not equate to skills or difficulty. Anyway, final verdict on the positives: the game is insanely fun and immersive, its combat is extremely impactful, it has a very diverse class system with an amazing progression, and its open world is gorgeous, plus it feels very much alive. On the neutral side, performance was pretty stable, albeit no 60 FPS option. In this day and age, that can be a pretty big minus. And of course, the story and the voice mixing being kinda mid-tier in my opinion. And finally, the negatives, it's, well, pretty much the limited and nonsensical save file system, combined with the idea of having easy to fail quests. But to answer your final question, is the game worth it? Well, in my opinion, absolutely it is. It is a must play. It's one of the best games I played in a while, and it's definitely extremely fun. Absolutely worth every single penny and every single second. You're not gonna be disappointed, despite some of the limitations and some of the drawbacks being done in the name of so-called difficulty. But otherwise, extremely fun and you will not be disappointed. This is it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.